It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. I'm Craig Hoffman. He is Logan Paulsen. And Logan, let's jump right into it. Biggest story in the NFL yesterday was Jeff Okudah traded from the Lions to the Falcons. The number 3 overall pick in the 2020 draft is traded for a 5th round pick in the 2023 draft. The Lions were facing a dilemma of whether or not to give Okudah his 5th-year options. He's missed a bunch of time due to injury. Wait, that sounds very familiar. The Commanders are currently in the same predicament, trying to figure out what to do with the player picked right ahead of Okudah. Of course, his college teammate, Chase Young, the number 2 overall pick of the 2020 draft, who has missed a whole bunch of time due to injury and who they are trying to figure out the 5th-year option on. When you heard the news of this trade and see the value that the Lions got for Okudah, how does that impact the way you think about what the Commanders should do with Chase Young, if at all? And then we'll get to what this trade means for the rest of the draft, with the Lions now probably upping their need at corner.
I think just from a big picture standpoint, it's kind of the way the league is treating former first round picks. I think the Rosen thing a couple of years ago with Arizona, guys that they're ready to kind of cut bait. They understand because the contract value of these players isn't astronomically high like it used to be. They can kind of move on and do some different things and kind of accrue draft capital in different ways. And unfortunately, Jeff Okudah has not been playing very well since he got into the league. And like you said, he's got a big injury history. So am I surprised by the 5th round pick? I do think from a Commander's perspective, I think it just shows you perhaps how the potential return for a Chase Young in a trade. I think there's a lot of people saying, trade Chase for a first round pick. And I hate to break it to you, but I don't think that will happen. Now, Chase was a different animal. Like, he was one of one with regards to evaluation. So I don't think you're going to get a 5th round pick. You might get a 3rd or a 4th, but I don't think he's going to get, definitely not going to get a 1st round pick, maybe not get a 2nd round pick. And it's just because the draft comes every year and free agency allows you to move pieces in a different way than you did before. So I think this is going to be kind of an eye-opening thing for Commanders fans specifically, because I think you and I are kind of both aware that, based on his performance the last 2 seasons, which is injury related, that there's not going to be a huge market for him. Now, he does have the rookie of the year thing going for him, all that kind of stuff, but you haven't seen that guy for a couple of years. And again, that's not entirely his fault. Injuries are outside of your control. The rehab took a long time, all those different things. So I don't know. I just think it should be kind of a sobering moment for Commanders fans.
It is, but it's also, to me, it reinforces that the plan has got to be to figure out how to let him play this year. And whether you pick up that 5th-year option or not, if you want to trade him next year with that 5th-year option exercised or not on the franchise tag or however it is, you need him to get a better year under his belt, because Chase, what made him special is not just the on-field production, but his leadership skills and his kind of leadership personality, I think made him the prospect that he was, and make him who he is. I mean, I talked about this on the radio show yesterday, but you can get sick and tired of seeing the camera shots of him on the sideline, super intense during games in which he's not playing. But that seems to be genuinely who that guy is. And even in the Commanders log thing that your colleagues did for the Commanders YouTube page, and Chase sits down for this interview, as does Terry and a bunch of other guys, but the way Chase talks about football and kind of the vision he's got and the energy he brings is a different level than Jeff Okudah, who they were hoping would be a really good corner for a long time, and obviously did not become that. And so the value here is I know they were 1 pick apart, but they're completely different players to me, completely different types of potential to me. And so for the Commanders, if that is the market, is a 3rd or 4th round pick, to me, that's not worth the return. To me, at that point, the better risk reward proposition is to let it play out and see if this guy can, even if you want to trade him, eventually up his value, or at least get to the point where if you lose him in free agency, you're getting a 3rd round comp pick anyway. And at that point, what's the point of trading him for a 4th? So I think that to me is where I sit after this, is wow, okay, if the market is depressed, on guys that you're going to have to pay soon, I'd rather take the risk of playing it out with Chase, because I still think the upside is there for him. Where with Okudah, I think the shine is off. Like we don't think any Jeff Okudah is going to ever go to Atlanta or anywhere else and be like an all-pro corner all of a sudden. You just hope that he's a good player for you if you're Atlanta for years to come, or you gave up a 5th-round pick for him and you move on after this year and don't wind up re-signing him.
Yeah, and I also think that he was probably a guy that they were thinking about cutting, because I would bet that the Detroit Lions are probably going to draft Witherspoon or Gonzalez at 6, and I would probably say Witherspoon if I was going to put money on it. So, I think if maybe Washington would be approaching this differently if they were in a position to draft, Will Anderson or one of these top edge rushers, and they can still draft somebody at 16. And I know fans probably wouldn't be too stoked on it, but I think it would show kind of a mindset towards Chase and what he's been doing and how he's on the team. Because I know we see like outwardly a big kind of verbose personality that's full of leadership stuff, but part of me thinks there's this is pure speculation, that there's other things at play here in terms of how he's handled himself. I think so as well. And so I think that's all stuff that's important to remember. And maybe they're tired of waiting, I guess, and that doesn't seem entirely fair, but the league isn't always fair. So I think that's just something to keep an eye on in terms of how they handle the draft, how they handle the next couple of weeks. I know Ron has said that he wants him here for OTAs. I'm not sure what Chase's plans are, but if I was him, I'd probably make an effort to be here. Just kind of, we talked about this last year when he didn't come, just for the optics of it, and just to kind of show, hey, like, Ron, I'm willing to meet you halfway here, and be here for a couple of days of OTA. So we'll see how that all shakes out. But I do think the next couple of weeks are going to be really interesting for Chase and the team's vision of team's plan for Chase moving forward.
Yeah, I would say with the kind of leadership stuff that I was talking about, that's an upside discussion. The reality is there's been questions about that stuff. Like, okay, you're a leader. Like, when you're here, you want to be the guy in the middle, or you just like being the center of attention. Because if you were an actual leader, maybe you'd show up for OTAs. Or, the timeline, I think, was frustrating. The communication didn't seem to be great.
Sure.
Even if the timeline ultimately was correct, like there was clearly some communication issues that sparked up, which is why the public timeline, I think, was all over the place, and there was reports here and reports there. So I do 100% agree with that, and I'm glad that you clarified that there are certainly questions. But I still think, when you talk about trading a guy or making decisions like this, you do have to consider not only the height of the upside, but the likelihood that you reach it. And I still think there's enough meat on that bone that doing anything prematurely for just to get it over with is silly. And it's a different case with Okudah. Like, Chase Young has played more snaps than Jeff Okudah. So,
which is crazy, yeah.
Which is nuts. I think Chase is like 1,300 something in there, and Okudah was like 1,250 or something like that. I saw that yesterday in passing, so I don't have the exact numbers committed to memory. But like, we're talking about a guy who not only was not as good, and this is part of the reason the thing with Chase is so complicated, is because he did have Rookie of the Year, his rookie year, which makes he made a Pro Bowl, which made him, or makes his 5th-year option more expensive. But like Okudah, it's like, no, he's just not that good, and he's injured all the time. So like, that's a much easier decision for the Lions to make. And I know the origin story is they're one pick apart, but from that origin, very different directions. Ultimately both disappointing, I think, and both players would probably say they're disappointed, but like the trajectories of disappointment are very, very different. So I really, I guess, ultimately don't think that this, while it's important, and like how this trade shapes the draft and the Lions' needs and what they might do at 6, I think is important. I actually don't think it has a huge impact directly on Chase, or even is reflective of what Chase's market is.
Right, but I do think I don't know if I entirely agree. I think it is a barometer to a certain extent, and I do think there would be more interest in Chase. Obviously, like when he is playing, he has been more impactful than Jeff Okudah. But I just think fans who are saying, "Oh, we'll get a 1st-round pick if we trade Chase," like, you just don't understand the market. I think that's unrealistic, and I think this shows that is unrealistic, despite him being a former 2nd pick overall, all those types of things. I think, again, the value would be more than Jeff Okudah, but it's not going to be a 1st-round pick. And so, like you said, if you get him on if you get him on the franchise tag, or if he leaves a free agency, you'll accrue a 3rd-round comp pick for him, probably. You know what I mean? So like, you don't need to do anything drastic here. unless you think he's being detrimental to the locker room or he's being detrimental to the vision.
Right.
And that's we have no insight on that. I'm just saying, like, hypothetically, if that's something that does happen or that does come to light, I think that would be a reason that they would consider moving on from him sooner rather than later.
Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. All right, the rest of our show today is going to be very draft heavy, as you'd imagine. We are just 2 weeks away from the draft. Also, I should have said this off the very top of the show, but very exciting news. Next week, the podcast we record on Wednesday hits YouTube late Wednesday, out to the audio world on Thursdays. Is going to be a crossover episode with our guys Brian Baldinger and Jason Lockenfora from Odyssey's Big Giant NFL Insider podcast. So I'm pretty pumped about that. So we'll have Baldy, who obviously watches a ton of tape and is kind of one of the, I would say he's like kind of a trailblazer in the, hey, I'm a former player who watches tape realm. So paved the way for the Logan Paulsons of the world. Baldy's been doing it for a long time and is fantastic. Has his Baldy's breakdowns. He's so good. You can also catch him on NFL Network. And Lockenfora, who's obviously one of the top insiders in the league, has been in kind of that insider position, knows so many people in the league for a decade plus, and is also a host on one of our stations, 105.7. He does afternoons in Baltimore. So they're going to join us. Big Giant crossover episode. If you listen to their podcast, you listen here. Listen to the episode on our feed. Like, give us the numbers. No, I'm just kidding. But it'll be the same podcast on both. Really, really pumped for that. So that'll be next Wednesday. Make sure you're subscribed so you do not miss it. All right. As for the rest of the show today, let's start off with Mel Kiper's mock, Logan, because it was very, very interesting. He dropped his 2-round mock yesterday, and he's got a trade in the top 3 that I can't decide whether I love or I absolutely hate. He's got Tennessee trading up to the 3 spot with Arizona to take Anthony Richardson. What do you make of that decision?
Yeah, I mean, the thing about Tennessee at the moment is that they seem to be kind of in the midst of deciding whether or not they want to rebuild. You know, they cut Taylor Lewan. They moved on from Ben Johnson or Ben Jones. I forget exactly what his name is. Their starting guard, they paid a lot of money to. They're kind of in flux. And usually when you start cutting big kind of franchise, big money players, it's like, are we getting younger? Are we building in the draft? There was talks of trading Tannehill, talks of trading Derrick Henry, all of those different things. So I do think that when you look at this move, it kind of would just kind of finalize the rebuild. You're basically saying we are getting ready to move on from Ryan Tannehill. Maybe he sits with us for a year while we bring the young guy Richardson along. This is definitely a team that is a perfect candidate for this type of move. You know, I was kind of leaning towards Atlanta. We were talking about that a little bit before the show started, just because I think Atlanta's offense is more ready to accommodate an Anthony Richardson. But if you think Anthony Richardson's the guy and you think he's going to be franchise changing type of player, like, this is the type of move a team needs to make. And part of it is because if you're planning on being good next year, you know, let's say you win 8 games if you're Tennessee, you will not be in a position to pick one of the top guys. You're going to be in the same position next year. And at least now at 3, there's a team that doesn't need a quarterback that would be willing to trade with you. And I think you have a shot at getting a guy that you think has a high upside. So that this feels like a good move for Tennessee. It just would kind of show their fans the direction that their team is going for the future.
So here's the reason why I potentially love it and potentially hate it is just 2 sides of the same sword. You drafted Malik Willis in the 3rd round last year, and he was not good in his games. So bad, in fact, that you go out and sign Joshua Dobbs, who's not exactly a world beater, to play your most important games of the season after Ryan Tannehill is hurt late in the year. So you do have one more year of Tannehill. He can certainly be a bridge guy if you want to give Willis another year, or even Richardson if you draft him. But you have this crazy athlete with a huge arm, incredible mobility, great runner. Like, you've got him in your building, and you've already put 1 year into him, and you drafted him in the 3rd round. So it's not like you drafted him in the 1st, but you did draft him in the 3rd. And for that reason, drafting another guy who is a better version of that, who's also going to need time, feels incredibly silly. However, if you saw Richardson, or you saw Willis, and you're like, oh God, we messed that up. We know we want this kind of guy because we want to be a run first team, whether it's with Derrick Henry, whoever comes after Derrick Henry. But we know that that's who we want to be, and having a quarterback who can be 1,000-yard rusher is something that's important to us. But Willis is not that guy because he's so far away, aka he'll never get there. Then I guess I understand it. If it basically, to me, this is really smart if you know that Willis is broken beyond repair or not able to ever get to a playable level. However, if he is, and he just needs a little bit more time in a year where you're already kind of rebuilding anyway, I would just stick with Willis and use your top, whatever pick that they have. I can't remember, their 11th, I think,
11.
Is where their natural spot is. They're trading up to third here. I would use the 11th pick on literally anything else. And I just can't decide. I mean, I guess it's hard to make that determination without knowing what Willis is from the inside. But that's kind of where I sit. I was like, if Willis is broken, sure, love it. If he's not, then just keep developing him and go that route.
I mean, that's essentially what the Atlanta Falcons have committed to, at least in name, to Ritter, right? They've kind of done the same thing, third-round quarterback, whatever. I do think it's important to acknowledge the distinction between Willis and Richardson. Like, Willis was so incredibly raw, so raw. And then there was all these rumors around the combine that he couldn't, from his college coaches, that he couldn't learn offenses. And I think you see that now, right? And so with that information, like, this does not surprise me in the least that this would even come up. And I think what you're seeing now is that, like, you need to take more bites at the apple. And if he can't do it, and it's like, if he's in a question that he can't do it, let's go with a guy who's a little bit more of a sure thing. He's a better athlete. He's played a better football at a higher level. He's shown more traits. Now, is he still a little bit of a developmental guy? Absolutely. But it's not. Don't clump those two guys together. I think it's natural to do that because of their skill sets and because of their play styles. But
and the fact they both need development, it's just like, how much do they need?
Right. But I think Richardson is closer, and I think because of his physical freakiness, you feel a little bit better about it. So if this is the way they want to go, again, I said I'd probably prefer Atlanta, but if this is the way they want to go, I think this is an excellent move for them, because you're basically saying we need a franchise quarterback of the future, a young guy. And if this is your evaluation, trust your evaluation and get that done. So I think that is, I don't hate it. I never hate trading up and taking a shot on a quarterback if you think it's the guy. I think that's where the discussion is do you have enough confidence that Anthony Richardson is that guy? And I don't know if I can definitively say yes based on what I've seen. Like, would I trade up for him? I'd be tempted, but I don't think I would, just because there's a lot of question marks about him and his development, his lack of experience, all those different things.
Yeah. I think hearing what you just said about Willis, like, at first I was like, I hate this so much. And then as kind of we talked through it yesterday on the show, I was like, actually, I think I love this. And I think I've landed on, like, okay, I'm down with this, because to me, what this says, if like this is out there, whether it's getting leaked to Mel or just like through league circles, or he's proposing this based off what he's heard about Willis, it's like they already know, like, Willis was a mistake.
For sure they know.
He's just never gonna
the
get
Dobbs
there.
thing. The Dobbs thing is the biggest indicator ever. Willis was in the offense for like 15 weeks as the number 2 guy. Right? For 15
and number
weeks.
1 for some of those weeks.
Right. And then you say, this guy can't even execute after that. We can't get a package out there for him for whatever reason. And you get a guy off the street who executes the offense better than him. I think that's all the indication you need. Right. And maybe he has a great offseason. Maybe he's really developed. I don't know. But I'm not mortgaging my future or the future of my franchise on that.
I would say the only thing that would be a little tempting is to try it again, see if he can figure it out with another offseason. And then if he bombs, then you're in the Caleb Williams sweepstakes. But that is risky. And if you like Richardson, why would you just take Richardson?
I think that's the big thing. If you like,
so it just depends on how much you like. Like, if you think Richardson can develop into the guy, and because of where you're at and your current phasing of your roster, that you have a year till you're going to be competitive anyway. Like, they might trade Derrick Henry on draft day. Like, that's a possibility. Like, they absolutely are trying to reset in Tennessee. And so if you have that year, like, and Richardson's ceiling is what it is, like, I don't mind that at all. Who else do you think is a possibility? You mentioned Atlanta to trade up for Richardson. Like, who are the best fits for him if someone is going to leapfrog Indy? And also, if you're Indy, would you consider trading up one spot to make sure that you get him?
I think if you're Indy, you just trade up one spot to make sure you get the guy that you want. Whether it's Richardson or Levis. I don't have any insight on who they want. A team that I love for Richardson is Detroit. They have an extra first round pick. Can you move up with they're picking 6? Can you move up to 3? Get their guy of the future and have him sit for 2 years behind Goff? Like, I think that is excellent. And I know they feel like they're in a window. I think they probably feel like they can win now with Goff. But if you do feel that way, you're not going to be picking this high ever again. And to have access to this kind of talent in this draft, I think is pretty hard to pass up. So that's a team that I think if I was them, I would definitely think about doing that. Will they do it? Probably not. But those are probably my 3 teams: Detroit, Atlanta, and Tennessee. Quite frankly, to trade into that 3rd spot. And I don't know who they're going to pick, but to trade into the 3rd spot for their quarterback of the future.
Yeah. The Atlanta fit seems so logical.
Seems silly, right?
They want to be a crazy run heavy team. They want to run a ton of outside zone. Like, it feels like they could recreate as close to what we've seen of the 2012 offense you were a part of here.
Yeah.
Where it's like, we can go super zone read. We can simplify things for our quarterback. Our quarterback is a home run threat to score from anywhere on the field with his legs or his arm, because just like RG, like, Richardson has a cannon. Like, his immediate best weapon is going to be his legs, where he could be 1,000-yard rusher from day one. He's also a better runner than RG was. Like, Robert in a straight line was incredible. And you think of like the run against Minnesota, where he gets out on the edge, he gets to run straight, nobody can catch him. But like, as a shifty, like, make people miss guy, and obviously the physical strength and size that Richardson has compared to what Robert was. Talking about 2 totally different athletes, but like, Robert, as you well know, is someone who was on the receiving end of his catches. Like, he had a cannon. Like, the deep ball was incredible for him. And he could really zip it. And obviously Richardson has that as well. It feels like Atlanta could recreate some level of that with Arthur Smith. And the question becomes, like, do they want to give up the capital it takes, or do they have too many holes elsewhere on the roster? Like, to me, that would be the concern if I was Atlanta. But they've also done a good job of filling some of that stuff in free agency. Like, they obviously get Okudah. They'll see if they can revive his career and keep him healthy to start. And then, is he good? But they also have like Jesse Bates. They have, who they signed in the secondary. They did some smart things in free agency to bulk up some of their needs. They re-signed McGarry, and all of a sudden it's like, in a very, very, very weak NFC South, they got as good a shot as anybody.
Right, absolutely. So, I mean, that seems like, again, I agree. I think that's probably the best natural fit for him, but they've committed to Ritter, at least in name, and we'll see on draft day. I think this year, draft day is going to be a little crazy with regards to trades. I think it's going to be all over the place, because I think we're going to talk about this later in the show, but like, I think depending on who you talk to, you're going to get wildly different evaluations on some of these guys. Like, I listened to it's a scouting podcast, and they have a couple scouts on that kind of give former scouts that give their grades on guys. And very rarely are they unanimous after the first 1 or 2 guys. And I think with Richardson, for example, the last one I listened to, some people had him as the 6th guy. Some people had him as 7. Some people were, he's the number 1 guy. So I think it just, depending on the team and their evaluation, you're going to get drastically different perspectives and drastically different opinions on what the trade is worth to the team. So.
Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. I'm Craig Hoffman. He is Logan Paulson. Make sure you're subscribed wherever it is that you are listening or watching right now. A podcast comes out twice a week. We don't want you to miss anything. But Logan, let's actually get into that. We're going to call this segment The Art of Value. Yeah. Right? Because it is certainly not a science. It is not something that is beyond mathematical reproach. And also, art is something whose beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I might look at a painting and be like, that is a masterpiece. And you might look at it and be like, that is hideous. I would never put that in my... Yeah, I would not pay a cent for that. I would not hang it in my home. And whether it's scheme fit, certain traits that you'll like, personality fit with the position coach, there are so many different things that impact how a player is valued by each individual, nevertheless, team evaluator. So let's just start broad and then kind of get into some of the examples of why a guy like Darnell Wright all of a sudden is being mocked number 9 in Chicago, when a lot of people throughout most of this process had him as a back end of the first round guy, maybe even slipping into the second. Meanwhile, you've been talking about a guy like Anton Harrison, who you think is going to go possibly in the first half of the first round, someone who's Washington could take at 16. Kiper's got him going 32. DeJuan Jones is not in this 2-round mock at all for Mel Kiper. And he's
got Blake Freeland ahead of him, you know, and I hate Blake Freeland. I hate is a strong word, but I think he's more of a developmental guy than picking someone in the second round.
How do we wind up with these prospects all over the map?
Yeah, so I think it's really interesting, you know, and I think the tackles is something we've talked about. I think it's relevant to Washington. So, you know, Peter Skoronski is a guy that feels pretty safe and feels like a lot of people are going to have a very high value on him, right? Because he's very technically sound. He plays physically, not a lot of mental mistakes. Physical measurements are solid in terms of height, weights, or in terms of jumping, running, sprinting type of thing. A little bit undersized, right? So there are teams that'll have, we've talked about physical thresholds before, that have a physical threshold on him and say he doesn't meet the physical threshold. He's a guard for us. So if you have him evaluated as a guard, he's going to instantly move past a guy like Paris Johnson or Broderick Jones, right? And so then I get to my evaluation and I say, well, I think he can play tackle, and I think he's a good enough football player that he's going to be either a guard or a tackle, and I'm okay with taking a guard or a tackle at 8 as the best offensive lineman in the draft, and I think he's ready to play right now, so he's my number 1 guy. But a team might have a physical limitation on him. They might not like his upside. That's another thing a lot of guys do, is they draft for upside. So like Paris Johnson has an upside that can't even be measured. You know, he's 6'7", he's 320, 315. He's fast. He's explosive. He's dexterous. He's got long arms. He's got everything you want. He's got position flex. And his ceiling is that he could be a top 5 tackle in the NFL because physically he's got those traits. So some teams might have him as number 1, right? You say Broderick Jones. Broderick Jones, again, another athletic, physical freak from a height, weight, speed, movement standpoint. But I technically don't like how he plays. I think he's got technical deficiencies in his game that I don't like. So he goes down the board. So I have Anton Harrison above him, right, in terms of pass protection, things like that. So even in this slight 3-man thing, depending on who you talk to, you could have Paris Johnson, Anton Harrison, or Peter Skoronski as your number 1 tackle in this draft. And that's just from that's just the perspective of the player. You know, Darnell Wright, we haven't talked about him. Like, I could see there is a path to me seeing him as the number 1 tackle taken in this draft because he's big. Yeah, he's big. He's physical. He's got excellent feet. He kind of plays the position with the appropriate amount of violence. Is it always perfect? No. Is he a 1-year wonder? Yes. And some people are going to demote him for that. So it just, again, there is so many, it's about making your case and making your argument. And I was listening to something a GM said. He's like, we had to, I think I've said this on the show, is we had to go to a tiered system because opinions are so different. We just have to get guys tiered correctly, get them in the right buckets so that we can say, hey, your opinion on Anton Harrison and my opinion on Darnell Wright, we view them as comparable players. So it doesn't really matter who we take here to fit our perspective, right? So the scouts don't get mad at each other. And this is not even without talking about, I think, scheme fit, right? Because I think if you're a run first scheme, Darnell Wright's going to move up. So for Chicago, that's I think a good fit, right? Anton Harrison for a pass first team like Kansas City or whatever makes a ton of sense to me. So hopefully that clears that up a little bit just from like a tackle perspective, you know? And then the fact that doesn't have DeJuan Jones in the first 2 rounds is kind of insane to me, because when you talk to people around the league, people are pretty high in DeJuan Jones because of the physical upside and the fact that they think he could be maybe the best tackle long-term in this class, right? But then Mel Kiper, a guy that I have a ton of respect for, has Blake Freeland as a top, what is it, the 7th tackle on his board, 6th tackle on his board?
Something like that. Or at least how he comes off in terms of, because that's the thing too, is like the board versus the mock, like Mel's, I can pull up their ESPN's rankings, but I don't know if Mel has his big board up or that's just something McShay does at this point. Point is, like, he might have DeJuan Jones higher, but he might think that the fit is better in Washington for Freeland unless he goes there.
Yeah, and I don't agree with that, because I don't think Freeland's like ready to play, and I think his upside's a little bit lower. And here I've heard Mel talk about Blake Freeland, and he thinks because of the athletic traits, his upside's higher. And I kind of disagree because I think he's technically too far away. And there's a difference of opinion right there on a player that, and I think I'm right. But I'm going to trust my evaluation. I'm going to trust my perspective. But I think that just shows you like the perception of value, and then like that's just within the same position. And how do you weigh that value? Positional value, positional value for your team, positional value for your scheme, and it just becomes super, super complicated. And so on these boards, you'll see somebody, mock Nolan Smith in the top 10. And if you get a comp saying, oh, he's the next Von Miller, then that absolutely makes sense. And I can see that. I can see him being that player, but it's just another team might say he's too small. He's 235 pounds. He's too small to play defensive in the NFL.
Right. So for Kiper, he's got his tackle rankings. This is his big board. Paris Johnson, Broderick Jones, Darnell Wright, Anton Harrison, Matthew Bergeron, Blake Freeland, Cody Mock, Tyler Steen, DeJuan Jones, Joey Fisher, Jalen Duncan. That's his top 11.
Wow.
Meanwhile, Todd McShay and Scouts Inc. Have Skoronski, Jones, Johnson, Wright, Harrison. DeJuan Jones is 6 for them.
Right.
Cody Mock, Matthew Bergeron, Jalen Duncan, Blake Freeland's 10, Tyler Steen's 11. So same 11 guys, very different order.
Yeah, see, I'd probably agree more with the second list there, and I'd probably even have Tyler Steen ahead of Blake Freeland, just to give you some context on my perspective there. And I think Cody Mock is a guard. You know what I mean? Like, so it's like he's the 5th tackle on that board. Right. He's a guard to me. So,
and by the way, he's got Kiper's got Skoronski listed as a guard on his list.
Right, and I can see that. But again, I'm going to let him play tackle first. So I think that's just a really good case study in showing value and like how it's totally in the eye of the beholder. And you put in all this work and you try to make it as not objective as possible, or not subjective as possible, but it's a subjective thing. It's an art, not a science. And that's why the draft is such a crapshoot. Because let's say you got a scout who you really trust, who's got a high evaluation on somebody, and they say, this is the guy, we got to make it happen. And he just misses. Right? He just misses on the eval, and you make that assessment on him, and his track record's good, but he misses on this guy. And I think that's where this whole process becomes so convoluted and so complicated. And that's why, in my opinion, you should never overvalue your evaluation. You should always try to kind of see what the groupthink is on a player and make sure that you can kind of get that perspective. I think Tyree Wilson's a very interesting example of this. Like, I'm not overly hyped up with Tyree Wilson, right? I don't love his tape, but everybody else seems to love it. And so I'm like, there's something going on here that I'm not necessarily seeing. Like, am I going to take him at 6 or 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12? Probably not. I'd go a different direction. Like, I think in our mock, we kind of let him slide a little bit, or I don't remember exactly what happened. Mm-hmm. But I'm also not going to overvalue my evaluation, because there's something in there in the soup that I'm not seeing potentially. And I always want to keep that in the back of my mind, and I think that that's something where I think teams, you see them reach on players like I guess it was the Oakland Raiders when, what's his name was the GM there. What was he was the TV analyst guy?
Mike Mayock.
And they were constantly reaching on players.
Right.
It's just because he trusted his evaluation too much. And that's bad process, because you're not always going to be right. And it's important to kind of fall into the slots of the big board and see where players are falling and how they're allocated. And then you can, if you do really like a player, say, hey, everyone likes these players more. I can get this guy in the second round. So it just helps you build your draft process out. And it's such a subjective thing. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder in life, and especially when it comes to football evaluations.
Definitely. So how does this then impact the rest? Like, okay, so that's a big giant conversation that is in a lot of ways internal, right? This is how we set our board. This is how we do it. But then how does that affect everything else? And this is where, like, the Commanders sitting at 16 have to have that feeling of what other teams think.
Sure.
Because if everyone has the same board, there's no trades in the draft.
Correct.
Because there's no reason to go up and get a player if you don't value them more than someone else. Like, okay, well, why would we trade up for, Anton Harrison if we think he's the same value as everyone else does? Or, if our board isn't the same in terms of the tiers. And so what the Commanders need to happen is they need someone to fall who they don't particularly like, that someone that they're like, okay, fine, but another team, and really ideally two other teams love. So let's say that player is Broderick Jones. Let's say at tackle, they're just like, he's all the people that don't like Broderick Jones, we like it. We don't like him for those reasons. But there's a lot of people that really like Broderick Jones. So this upside's crazy.
Here, let me just like polish this up a little bit. Yeah. So to your point, let's say I have, let's say you have Skoronski, Paris Johnson, and Broderick Jones as your top tier offensive linemen. I don't disagree. I disagree with that, right? But let's say that's what you have on your board. And on my board, I have Paris Johnson, Skoronski, Harrison, Broderick Jones. And Broderick Jones is a second tier player for me.
Correct.
Right? So I don't care. I don't give a damn. But you think he's a top 3 tackle in this draft, right?
And you're now the Commanders. So I'm calling you and I'm going, hey, what's it going to take for me, Tampa, to come up to 16 because we got a guy that we like.
Because all the other top tier tackles are gone.
Yeah, because Skoronski and who do we say? Paris Johnson are gone.
Yep. And so
Jones has fallen.
Yeah, and he's right there at 16. We could take him. We don't like him that much. But Tampa, he's in that top tier of offensive lineman for them. He's the only other first-round offensive lineman. Because that's in addition to buckets, they also tier it by first-round grade, right? So let's say they have a first-round grade on them, and none of the other offensive linemen have a first-round grade. But hey, look at me. I'm feeling okay about that because I have Anton Harrison with a first-round grade. So if I know you're going to trade up to this spot for Broderick Jones, great, take him. Because I'll just trade back to 19 and I'll take Anton Harrison. And I get the guy I want and another pick, and you get the guy you want, and you screwed that up in my evaluation, right? And I think you overvalued your evaluation, if that makes sense.
And then the best thing that can happen is, because like if that's the case, right, we're two teams, we're on the phone. What's going to happen is I'm going to say, hey, all right, the Jimmy Johnson draft card, which is kind of still what most teams base their trade values off of, says to go from 19 to 16, it's going to cost you your X and Y pick. We'll send you this and maybe one of our fifths, whatever the card says, right? But if all of a sudden, who we say is the Commanders, you're the Commanders, right? In this particular deal, if you can say, hey, the card says it's this, but we've also got Minnesota at 23 on the phone, and they're willing to go over the card value,
and they want
your
Nolan
best
Smith.
Offer.
Like they want Nolan Smith or somebody completely different. They just want the spot because again, their evaluation might be Nolan Smith is a top 10 player in the draft, right? And he's there at 16. Like we got to get up and get him. You know what I'm saying? And so I think that's the cool thing about this process is it's not just tackles. It's not just DBs. It's like if you have a top 10, top 5 evaluation on a player, and I think everyone sees these mock drafts now and it's like, oh, these are the top 5 guys. These are the top 10 guys. That's not how teams look at it. There are dudes in there that are saying, oh, Kalijah Cansey's the best defensive tackle in the draft. And if he starts sliding down the board and he's available at 16, I could see someone in the back end trading up. It just is about who do I think the prettiest girl at the bar is or the prettiest boy, whatever it is, and how am I going to make sure that I go home with them with the right value? And again, it only works if they have a big grade on these guys, and they might. We don't know teams' draft boards, and that's where they guard them with their lives. But that's all of a sudden where you get, and I think in this draft specifically, because there's so many there's not like this definitive, like this guy's awesome. You're going to get mixed evaluations and it can lead to this kind of pop up and let's see if we can get what we can get.
Yeah. And like you said, it doesn't have to be the same player, but like the best scenario is you get Detroit at 18 and Minnesota at 23, two division rivals fighting over the same player. Because if it's different players, then maybe one of them calls Pittsburgh and is like, hey, we know that Minnesota is about to trade up to 16 to take Nolan Smith. We want who is it we have falling? Broderick Jones. Can we work out something with you instead? They give up a little bit less. They still get their guy. That's good information, usage. That's good information sharing, etc. But if you got two teams, and especially if they specifically hate each other, are gonna have to play each other twice a year, fighting over the same guy, now you have a bidding war. Like that's the absolute best thing, and especially when because to your point, right? in this scenario, your tier 1 players are gone. There's not a player on your board that you still want at that spot.
Yes.
You now have 10 players in the next bucket, and you can get any of those 10 and be happy 5 picks from now. Like, sweet.
Yes.
Okay, so 4 of them might be gone, but so be it.
Right.
We still are going to get a guy we like. So that is the best.
Plus a pick.
Hey,
plus a pick.
Right. Plus pick or picks, depending on where the movement is, etc. So I think that, like, that's where the information game becomes so important.
Oh, so important.
Do you know what other teams want? Do you know who you're going to want to call when you get to the clock? That it's like, and I think that's the risk of information sharing, but also the reward of it if you're a GM. Like, if I am, oh God, what's the GM's name in Detroit?
I don't even know.
Oh
anymore.
God, what's his name? He was on Hard Knocks last year. He was great. That guy. Or if I'm, whoever the GM is in Tampa, I'm probably having a conversation sometime earlier in the week of the draft, like Monday, Tuesday. I'm giving one of the Martys a call and going, hey, if player X, like, what do you think? Brad Holmes. Thank you, Nick. If I'm Brad Holmes at 18, I call the Martys and I'm like, hey, it doesn't seem like you would really be interested in this player. Yeah. We really like him. Like, if he's on the clock or on the board when you get on the clock, give me a call.
Right. Yeah. I wonder if they do that.
There's those kinds of things that definitely happen. I mean, these guys all know each other too. And so there's you don't want to give away your cards, but you also don't want to be unprepared. And you also don't want a team to be on the phone with someone else when you know that there's a distinct possibility that you could move up in the draft and get where you want to go. So, like, it's a huge, like, risk reward. Do I share this info? Do I not? How close do I hold this to the vest? Can I trust this guy? Like, there's a lot of that's happening behind the scenes. And by the way, I think that also winds up making its way to some of the people in the media doing the mock drafts that can inform them. Is like, I heard that this team really likes this player. Like, sometimes teams, as much as they protect their boards, sometimes they want it out there so that other teams know and they can make those calls and be prepared for all situations come actual draft day.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. And that's why it's so crazy to me. Like, I remember I was talking to someone last year and they're like, oh, draft's coming up. You excited? He's like, no, man, it's a lot of work for a very small payoff potentially, very small, like, kind of 7 guys. And you got to evaluate 300 and you got to kind of do all these mental gymnastics. And it is a crazy thing that takes a lot of time. But, if you make the right call, you're building your team, so that's it's a fun time of year.
No doubt. All right. So next Wednesday, we have our crossover podcast with Brian Baldinger and Jason Lockenfora. Very much looking forward to that. Obviously, have a pod before that on Monday. And then in 2 weeks, we'll do our final mock draft ahead of the draft on Thursday. And then I don't know exactly what we'll do. Maybe we do one the day before the draft pod, or maybe we wait till Friday once the first round pick is in. Maybe we do extra pods that week, so we'll figure that out.
Yeah, we could do little bonus pods or something.
Yeah, which is why, Logan, people should subscribe. That way, you just never miss an episode. It's like, oh, hey, look, another episode. You can watch us at youtube.com/@1067 The Fan. Post some clips, youtube.com/@Craig Hoffman as well. Of course, you can listen on the free Odyssey app or your favorite podcast platform. Until then, until next week, he's Logan, I'm Craig, and we'll see you. Thanks for listening. Take care. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command. First, why don't you like it? It lets other people know that it was good, and then they should watch it too. And Logan, we have a new exclusive home for full episodes.
We do. 1067 The Fan's YouTube page. Go check it out and please subscribe.
Yeah, do what Logan said.
Do it.
Very, very smart.